I was a co-worker at the San Fernando Valley in Van Ness, Pasadena Gardens retirement home. Many people were, according to the voters, were provisional, even though they had registered a few months before this. Even though the elderly people in that retirement home weren't found on the list. And I couldn't do anything for them just besides give them a provisional ballot. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Sigfrids, and I went around to various polling places in my congressional district, District 34, on voting day, just to observe and see how many of these provisional ballots were being handed out. And while I hear you, Mr. Logan, assuring us that all these provisional ballots will be counted, I think what we want to know is that poll workers are properly instructed to tell people that these votes aren't counted that day. I talked to a poll worker who said, when I brought this up, that none of the votes are counted that day, which we all know isn't true. I spoke to numerous people who had taken time off of work, many who worked several jobs to come and vote, and didn't find their names on the list, so had to vote provisionally. And I think that in and of itself is disenfranchising to people who want their votes to be counted that day, including the vast majority of people who are first-time registered voters in this California.
Thank you. Next speaker.
I had issues with my voting place, obviously, but apparently they're all due to too many people wanting to vote, so I guess I can't do that here. I'm just here because I have this Tuesday off, and I know a lot of people have problems worse than I do, and just wanted to be here to get my voice heard, and maybe other people couldn't do. Thank you very much, madam.
The amount of people voting provisionally as we saw on the day of June 7th. My inspector was handing them out like candy, discarding the fact that they can be counted up to a month later when a winner of the primary is announced the day of. People showed up with proof of residency and registration, yet were nowhere to be found on the roster. They were told to vote provisionally. In other incidents, we had people show up on the roster as Republican, but when we checked online, they were registered as no party preference or Democrat and vice versa. They too were told to vote provisionally. Lastly, common among young voters or people who people who registered on the deadline showed up on the roster as vote by mail, but had only received a shackle ballot.
I'm a business person. I live in Venice. I've voted Democrat in every election since 1992. I used to think that voter fraud was some sort of fantasy dreamed up by sore losers as part of a right-wing conspiracy. I now think differently. In fact, according to the most recent polls, 66% of Americans no longer have faith in the electoral process. That is highly dangerous for our democracy. It is highly dangerous. We have to ask ourselves two important questions. How many people were prevented from voting, and how many provisional ballots were disqualified? That must be where we start to piece together what has happened, where you now have thousands of people across the country wondering whether or not our democracy in fact exists.
My name is Jody Bardenberger. Thank you very much for hearing us this morning. Kind of scary to be able to say that. I'm not a first-time voter. I am a first-time California voter, as you heard mentioned earlier today. My experience was this. I voted in a Koreatown, and I went in and I asked for a crossover ballot. I was registered as nonpartisan. I brought my brochure with me that I showed the person when I got there. I noticed immediately that they were struggling with English and understanding me, and I felt compassion, and I offered to come back and help. So I wanted to, get my vote counted. So after I was handed the American Independent, I went over to the machine, this square thing, tried to match up the colors, and realized I don't know what to do. So I went over to the young lady. I said, I'm college educated from Northeast and the East Coast, if it matters, and I can't figure that out. So please come help me, because I knew it was urgent that we needed help. I could see it.
I am a permanent resident, which prevents me from casting a vote. But I participated in canvases in Nevada and California to help those who can vote to go out and have their voices and the voices of millions like me be heard. In conclusion, my position is that we should take to voting in our local, state, and national level as a priority in moving our country forward towards a more progressive democracy and republic of the people, by the people, and for the people, just as our Constitution intended. And to our friend from Kenya, we are no longer the world's leader in true democracy thanks to this current election. Thank you.
I hustled voter registration up until May 23rd, 2 weeks before Election Day.
and many of us made the midnight trip to the county registrar office with new registrations. But it is evident, by evidence, that voter lists were printed 25 days before the deadline. There is no logic to this when the deadline to register was only 2 weeks before election day. While we may forgive a lack of information, we cannot forgive intentional misinformation. Many coworkers have testified that they were misinformed to give NDP voters provisional ballots. Every vote counts in a true democracy. We the people are here to defend our democracy and ask LA County to uphold the democratic principles that come from fair.
I was a poll worker at precinct 9002132B, and we experienced a lot of problems at our precinct, which had 2 precincts. First of all, poll worker training was too fast, and they sped through very critical information that we needed. Our inspector actually got the wrong location on his letter, so he arrived half an hour after the polls had opened. People had to vote provisionally at the other precinct table because he was not there and the materials were not there. He also told workers that they did not have to arrive at 6 o'clock as per the instructions, but to come at 6:15, 6:30. We had people that came to our precinct table within the address range, but however, they were actually at the other table. That was inexplicable. And this was just a failure to properly plan. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but I think it is lamentable that we have this system where this election was known to be a very big one, and it wasn't properly prepared for.
Sector of precincts 9002988A, and I appreciate Mr. Logan's words at the beginning. However, it seemed like there was a lot of blaming the voters happening. And as someone who was an inspector, I verified everybody's registration who came in on my phone, and there were 57 people in my small little precinct who had to cast a provisional ballot, who provided proof of registration, who brought the sample ballot that they had in the mail with our polling place and our table printed on it with their name. I guess I don't understand how they had time to print the proper information on the sample ballots that went out, but they didn't have time to update our rosters. Thank you.
And I'm a poll worker, I was a poll worker that day, and one thing that has not been mentioned is what about the dual trainings? I have copies of 2 different contradicting manuals. I have been talking to people because this is something that really bothered me. I found out about this 2 weeks before, and I didn't believe it because I wanted to believe Mr. Logan that this is a fair election. I would really like a response to the fact that I have 2 different manuals with 2 different trainings. One is saying, don't offer crossover ballots. Another one is saying, offer crossover ballots. Contradicting 2 manuals. I really would like an answer to that. It's very important because it's the thing that caused the provisional ballots at the polls. The other issue that I have is that this was addressed by an inspector the Sunday before the elections, and that supervisor said, we will call all the poll workers and correct this. Well, that only affected 10 or 15 poll workers. What about the other, whatever number you posted, 300 or whoever it was, 1,000, I don't know how many poll workers there are. They were not given proper instructions. So that is a really big issue with not only not instructing people correctly, but in addition, obstructing the crossover ballot.
Organizing director. 1 minute is not possibly enough time to share all the stories I have of my friends, of my family members who could not vote or had to vote provisionally, even though they had proof of registration, they had their sample ballot, their poll workers told them they were not on the list. One of my friends later came back and asked if he was on the list again and had them check the other precinct list, and he was on the list, but he was told he wasn't. Poll workers were not trained enough. And I spoke to a veteran poll worker because I went to 7 different polling locations because I wanted to see. And she said that they eliminated the mandatory in-person training. Why would you want poll workers to be trained less for one of the elections with historic voter turnout? And what I saw was 80% of provisional ballots being given at my polling location at Alpha Kappa Alpha on Ellendale. And poll workers, 3 didn't show up, many hadn't been trained, and most were being given provisionals. So I want to know, are we going to have a transparent process where we know why provisional ballots are being not counted at the registrar's office? Because they told me that it was only going to be if there wasn't signatures on it, or if there was some problem with the registration. I know every single person that got a provisional ballot was registered to vote, and I want all those people to be notified that their signature is needed, and I want the deadline to be pushed back.